really good task is one that connects well with other mathematical ideas. So if I give students a task that is rich, as we define it, it will have multiple entry points, and then it will have lots of different approaches and connections to other areas of math. So one way that we think about good tasks, we think of them as like anchor problems. I call them anchor problems because they're things that you can use throughout the year. And in a way, a task almost takes on a life of its own. You give the students a task. I have one I do at the beginning of the year where I have them bouncing balls in the hallway. They're using tennis balls and ping pong balls and so forth to see how high they bounce. And we use that in order to draw scatter plots and figure out the slopes of these lines. And then what happens is I go throughout the rest of the year, and from time to time we'll be doing a problem and a student will say, oh, that's just like that bouncing balls problem that we did back at the beginning of the year. And all of a sudden we're connecting it back. So not only was it a good problem for its own sake during that day, but it also serves as an anchor of something we can return to and talk about throughout the year. And so try to structure our classes in such a way that we have a number of these anchor problems, these really good strong tasks that students remember because they put their hands on them and they spend a lot of time and energy on them, and it allows them to make connections throughout the whole school year. There's been a lot of research that has been published in recent years about how the brain fires and how we remember things better when we have to struggle with them. And this is a kind of a paradox of education, because the reason why people go into teaching is it's a helping profession and they want to help kids. We want to help them in the learning process. And somehow we've got this sense in our heads, this what we consider to be common sense, that if I really want to help a student, that means show them how to do something. And in reality, when we show them how to do something and we take the struggle out of it, they're actually learning less. The way that the brain works is it depends on falling down from time to time and having to get back up. And it will fire better if it has to fall down and get back up. If you make a mistake and you say, oh, here's where the mistake is, or I get confused, or I have to try to look for a different way of doing the problem than somebody else is. In the process of going through that struggle, I actually learn it more deeply. I'm more likely to understand it better and retain the knowledge longer term. So I think as teachers, when we structure our lessons, our intent should not be to make sure that we design a lesson so that we show the students everything so that they've got it all laid out in front of them, but instead to make the lessons just vague enough that it's challenging to students and creates that struggle that in the end is productive struggle because it helps them to learn the content more deeply. There's been a lot published in the last few years about this, these kind of 5 steps of discourse in the classroom. And Dr. Peg Smith at University of Pittsburgh was the first one who sort of pulled those together and published them, and she was one of the team members that worked on Principles to Actions. And we talk in there about not just calling on any student in the classroom at any time to respond to a question, but instead we look at anticipating what the students are going to say or what they're going to do when we give them a problem, and then actually carefully monitoring what the students are doing as they work so that we can pick specific students that we want to share their solutions. And not only to share, but also to sequence them in a way that makes sense. So I'm going to be watching in my classroom, and maybe I have 25 students that are all doing the same problem. But as I walk around, I'm looking for 3 or 4 ways that students are approaching the problem that are particularly interesting or unique. And I'm not going to just say at the end when they're finished solving the problem, now I'm not going to say to the students, raise your hand if you got this answer, and then have them come up and share. I don't want that to randomly happen. I actually systematically want to pick those 3 or 4 students that I want the whole class to hear. So when they come up to share those solutions, it will help the rest of the class to see the different ways that the problem can be done. And then my last job is to sort of connect those ideas together. So it's dramatically changed what I do in my classroom, because very rarely anymore do I just say to my students, how many of you got 17 as an answer, and if the student got it, I'll say, how did you get that? I'm not randomly calling on anybody anymore. I'm actually looking carefully to pick those specific students that I want to make sure the whole class can hear to talk about how they came to that answer.